right, we are back with a bang and howl. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the Devops India Summit, and I am Ria, your host for this beautiful, beautiful day. I hope all of you are enjoying the summit. Please let us know your thoughts on LinkedIn, on Twitter with the hashtag DOIS22. So now we would be shortly joined by our next practitioner who is best known for developing the Canadian framework as a sense making device for decision makers. He is a pioneer in the field of complexity science and sense making and is the founder and chief scientific officer of Cognitive Edge. He is a popular and passionate keynote speaker on a range of subjects and is well known for his pragmatic cynicism and iconoclastic style. Today, he's going to share his deep insights on the subject being human and address the very pertinent question: how do we use human intelligence in a digitized world? Taking charge of your screens right now, please join me in welcoming Mr. Dave Snowden, who's joining us all the way from New Zealand. A very warm welcome, Dave. Thank you so much for joining us at the DevOps India Summit.
No, it's a real pleasure, and the weather here is slightly different. Don't call it windy Wellington for nothing. I think I'm probably the speakers here, so I wanted to talk about how you create environment in which basically technology is used to augment human intelligence, necessarily replace it. I'm also going to talk about some of the new work with and how do you engage users in what's called continuous scanning or so you can start to use humans as sensors within a system as well as computers. And I should say this comes from a long background. Systems really from the 1980s. And I built decision support systems for companies worldwide. So I've been very involved in the IT industry now for and really one of the things we've sort of focused on in that time is recognizing that technology and digitalization has huge power in intelligence, but fundamentally it can't replace it. And that actually is decades, because in many ways people have been trying to replace human intelligence with process. Talk about some aspects of being human and talk about some of the science of this stuff, and then so let me run through some basic facts. So first of all, human beings make decisions in quite complex ways. So which I use a lot is if you give radiologists a batch of and on the final and you ask them to look for anomalies like cancer nodules, and on the final of a gorilla, which is 48 times the size of a cancer nodule, then radiologists will not see it even though their eyes physically scan it, and you see it come to believe they were wrong when they talk with the 83% who didn't. Blindness, we do not see what we do not intend to see. This, and this is kind of like 101 science on this, is the most we scan of available decision is somewhere between 2 and 5%, dependent on how much we're constantly effectively being trained. And that's the max, right, in terms of what we can take. And that triggers a series of memories, both cognitive memories, physical memories, in terms of the stories that we tell and the stories of the society in which, and we blend those patterns together. This is all happening in nanoseconds. Patterns, and then the first pattern which fits, we actually apply. Fit pattern match. We do a first fit pattern match. Now, in evolutionary, it's happened. So, you know, if you think about the early hominoids on the savannas of Africa, large and yellow with very sharp teeth runs towards you at high speed. Do you want to available data? Look up a catalogue of the flora and fauna of the African. Having identified lion, look up best practice case studies on how to deal with lions. Time you do that, the only thing of any use to you would be the book of Jonah from the Old Testament, how to escape from the digestive tract of a large carnivore, written by a purported. So we evolved decisions to make decisions very, very quickly based on a partial scan, privilege in our most recent experiences. And as I say, in evolutionary terms, that makes a lot of. I'm going to throw some facts at you, then start to go through the implications. If you look at Walter Friedman's work on consciousness, and had the privilege of working him through a period where which centers evolved in mammals. And one of the things he found, and he did this, not on humans, is that there are chemicals in mammalian brains, which is in such a way that you never remember anything quite the same way twice. And again, the argument for evolution on this is if you remember the things the same way twice, evolution, you need a degree of, grit in the system. The grit which creates, you need some ambiguity in the system for things to move forward. So here for the sort of precise memory functions that computers provide, or for the support systems which also apply. And it kind of like that. So human language has actually evolved from art. Music come before language in human evolution. And so our language doesn't actually say this is one of those things. We can do that, but that's not the primary function of language. Abstractions. And the value of this is it allows us to distance ourselves so we can see completely novel connections between things. This is called abductive reasoning as opposed to inductive, which is case-based. It gives us huge evolutionary advantage because it makes us highly adaptive, which between apparently unconnected things, we can reuse something devised for one purpose different. The downside is it makes us prone to conspiracy theories. And then the final thing I want to say on this, and then I'll get into some of the practical implications, is arisen from Northern Europe, North America. It's kind of like pervaded the IT industry world, which is what we call mind-body dualism. So the basic concept that the mind makes all, when actually we know that consciousness is a distributed function. So for example, hand away from a hot plate, you don't think about it consciously. In fact, the brain doesn't. Now, this doesn't mean you haven't got free will. It means what you've got is an autonomic response. The brain is firing after the event to see if it got the automatic reaction right this time or not. And if you successfully fail, in that autonomic response, we'll switch to what's called novelty receptive response, which consumes a huge amount of energy we've really got to. And then we start to look for novelty or different patterns within the system, get a degree of cognitive stress. And again, in evolutionary terms, you can see why this. To summarize this, Klein, myself, and others are arguing there's no such thing as a cognitive. There are only cognitive heuristics, i.e., evolution doesn't allow things stability. And if you take overall in the scheme of things from a human society, so-called cognitive biases reduce the energy costs of decision making. In individual cases, they're not necessarily wrong overall. Now, in running through that, one of the things we commonly see in DevOps and in general is the assumption that a computer and a human brain work in similar ways. So if we give, if we have the right training and we're given the right information, we will actually, that actually isn't the case. Human beings are hugely influenced by the cultures they grow up in. Andy Clark called this scaffolding. So we into our social interactions and the shared stories of the communities we belong to give us a filtering mechanism so we can make decisions more quickly. The downside, the prejudices of our social group. So we're not necessarily open to difference outside of. I say, I've run through those things and I don't expect you to get them all first time, and some of them, but fundamentally, to put it in a simple way, silicon isn't carbon. Decisions is radically different from the way computers make decisions. And therefore, if you've got a system, you've got to start to think about the implications of that. And you've got to start to think systems which can effectively augment human decision making rather than replace. So what I want to do is having established that, is going through some of the methods and tools, we're designing, other people are designing, which can actually move in to data systems. Now, one of these is, and I'll tackle this directly, one of the things we're trying to get people to stop talking about is the whole mindset word, probably heresy to Agile people, because everybody believes Agile is about mindset. Actually argue that software development is really about process. And I think Devops Agile in many ways. The reality is that there's no such thing as a mind. It's gone through some of the reasons why not. It's not that our mind is set in a certain direction, which make up mindset. So one is, what level of agency do you have? What sort of decisions can you make? Yeah. Because if you have autonomy, you can't make decisions. Then mindset is irrelevant anyway, because it's not your responsibility. The second one is affordances. This is a concept for evolutionary biology. Basically says, if you want to understand how evolution happens in an ecosystem, you need allows to happen. So you may like succulent plants from the Brazilian, live in a desert, the affordance isn't available for them to grow. In fact, they'll die quite. So understanding the environmental factors, which of course can be social and cultural, to understanding what is possible for people in the first place. And the final one of these three affordance is assemblage. Now, again, I'll need to explain that because that's less obvious. If you grow up in a company or a society or a country, what actually happens is you listen to other people's stories, the stories you like, you hear more of, the stories and gradually these stories form a pattern or a sort of cloud of meaning. We lived in villages, that was one thing, but now we live on the internet, they cluster much faster. The way the internet algorithms work, you're likely to be put in clusters of extreme. But even apart from the internet, companies have unique cultures because we're told foundationally go through induction. All of those stories create a mechanism which effectively filters and directs us in certain ways. So instead of using the mindset word companies, we look at it from three perspectives. What level of agency is given to people is provided by the environment, and then what are the assemblage structures or the patterns forming the way people make decisions. And then it's much easier for us to devise into the way we work. So let me give you some really pragmatic examples of this. A lot of work in the social sector and the health sector for the last 10, 15 years. Started to focus on is to understand the day-to-day experience of medical people within hospitals and within social care within society. Worked out pretty fast is you can't send out specialist consultants or analysts to experience, because if you remember in attentional blindness, they will only listen to hear. In fact, to give you another simple fact on this, if somebody conducts more, then you start to form a subconscious hypothesis and you only hear things that we're after. So we're starting to take a radically different approach to this. Japanese manufacturer called the Gemba walk. And if you take the concept, it basically says people on the shop floor know what's going on. And you've got the concept of by which a manager is placed in a chalk circle on the shop floor and is asked to observe. So we're now distributing the Gemba concept by allowing a whole to continuously record observations and narrative about their day-to-day. I can talk about how we incentivize this later if you want, but that isn't actually particularly difficult. What I want to do is every time somebody uses a computer system and they get frustrated by something, record a story in the instance and explain what frustration they had. An idea of something they would like to see. I want them to record it at the time they think. And every time they sort of learn a lesson which they think would benefit other people, we want to record that. And also, quite interestingly, some of the work we do on this now is if somebody thinks something is slightly wrong, we allow them to record a story or an observation, but then we strip that out of the system. And when we get a pattern in those reports, then we sort of report it back to the company as anomaly. We're using this to urge your racism. Yeah, that's less relevant to DevOps, but that's kind of like some of the stuff we can do. The other thing we developed and patented working with DARPA for the US government on campus is the concept of high abstraction metadata, which can use symbols and language and shapes, words, so that people actually can't second guess what they're trying to do. And we're trying to remember language. We're trying to hold data at a level of abstraction so we can get novel. So what I can now do with this is I can then look at the patterns of narrative of users, over maybe a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks or even continue. And I can look into that and analyze it for patterns of frustration and patterns of desire. And that allows me to actually create a new type of backlog, which we term unarticulated needs. Then allows us to both improve the backlog going into development, into support, where actually developing software makes a real difference in terms of people. So we're going to get acceptance in a much better way in terms of the way. And this, by the way, is part of a whole new approach to design thinking in the articulated needs, rather than articulated needs, because that's where you can get them to the system. Effectively, it's called weak signal detection. You're not waiting level of frustration that they tell you they want change. You're identifying the weak signal and change requests downstream, and you're developing software or processes. And by the way, this is really important in a support environment, because you don't go wrong before you take action to correct it. So what we're starting to do there, and agents within our system, effectively is a scanning system, a sensing system to tell us what's going on in the field and to give us a mechanism by which we can feed. That also, by the way, has a whole new process of change, a whole new theory of change. I can look at those user stories and basically say, well, I can draw this as like a landscape map or a contour map, and I can say, guys, stories like these and fewer user stories like those. Now, that's achieving change than talking about abstract qualities or self-organization or whatever. These fewer stories like that can engage people on a larger level. So that's one thing we're also now starting to look at is how do we get feedback to Agile DevOps? And so what we start to do is we move the Gemba system into those teams. So we can now So basically, if you get continuous observation from a team, you can also stand up in Scrum. Yeah, you can also, every time the team interact with the users about how they behaved, and you can then look at the pattern in multiple micro behavior with their colleagues, with users, whatever, to actually create a quantitative team performance and a feedback mechanism which allows the team to self-correct short micro interventions rather than waiting for complaints and other processes. Kind of like a Gemba concept again, in which you replace formal reporting with experiences with high abstraction metadata, which is ungameable, and that's kind of like, so you're using the sort of 360 process of when people interact with the action, they interpret their interaction, and then you can see patterns in their interaction, so you can correct your behavior. So what we're trying to do is to entangle teams, to support teams, testing teams more thoroughly with the user environment. Fairly pragmatic methods now, but I'm teaching you some of the theory behind it. Working on is called entangled trios. And again, this is to try and improve development and support requirements. So when we work on this, we put together three people, say a young, bright coder, somebody you can build prototypes very quickly, you know the latest technology, relatively naive about the organization. And that naivety is important because they take a new perspective. We put them together with a systems architect or an end system tester or a support lead who, by bitter experience, knows the patterns of the system as a whole and is definitely not. And then the third member of the party is a user who's trained to talk with IT. This shortly to the general public. It's much easier to train not usable than train IT people to understand users. So that allows us those and deploy, say, 20 or 30 trios to look at a problem over a month or so, prototypes and solutions. And then we can synthesize or blend those together to actually create an improved service or to create effectively the initial back, whatever. We're building systems which avoid the sort of bias with the gorilla example by increasing a number of people, a number of sensors in the system, multiple perspectives. Now, what I've talked about so far is two human sensor networks. The other is called entangled trios, or what that does is to build informal networks across silos. Have users working with young programmers with experienced systems architects. The US process constantly reflects in the trios. What I'm doing is I'm building network relation in the technical population based on working together, which actually hugely improves the organization to respond to a crisis. I've done a whole bunch of interviews with senior executives, part of developing the European Union field guide to crisis management. Is everybody falls back to their informal networks, the people they really trust, rather than the formal system. That's the case. We're now starting to design systems which build those informal networks. Is we're creating channels between users and tech without any idea about what sort of knowledge will flow, for knowledge to flow through those channels when we need to do it. And this, by the way, is also the new cross-silo flow. And this is deeply pragmatic, easy to run. The third thing I'm going to mention, and just not go into detail on this, but this is things I'm talking about in the European Field Guide, are the three things you have to do to organization. And by that, I mean an organization which is designed to respond to which we can't forecast or anticipate. So one is human sensor networks, massing. As I can find the 17% who've seen the gorilla before they talk to the 83% who have systems, do that very effectively. The second is to build and create informal networks so knowledge can flow in unusual ways in a crisis. And the third is at the right level of granularity. And some of this actually goes back to object orientation in the 80s and 90s. Yeah, if you actually map your knowledge as fragments, then those fragments can come together in novel patterns in different circumstances. And that allows us to repurpose existing capability for new or unanticipated need. Technology innovation is actually quite important. So IBM dominated the computer industry because it was at one time the worldwide market leader in punch card control of machines. And it took that capability to create punch cards to create the first computer. And IBM was dominant is not because it invented things from scratch, but because it took something and used it for a completely new business opportunity. Yeah. And that's called radical repurposing. Microwave ovens came because Horatio realized the significance of a chocolate bar melted in his pocket when he was maintaining the radar machine. So he put a metal box around it and we got microwave ovens. With the pharmaceutical industry at the moment on clinical trials to capture multiple users so that we can spot side effects, because most drug development developed for one purpose, producing an unexpected side effect, which then gets exploited. But probably the one everybody will know is Viagra, which resulted from a rather embarrassing side effect at a conference in Canada, and that became until COVID. So that's kind of like the third leg of how you create a resilient organization. Notice in all of these, what I'm doing is I'm using technology to link from ways, but my primary interpretation is the human metadata of the raw data. Now, the origins of that are the work we did on counter-terrorism, both before and after 9/11. And one of the things we were focused on, how do we improve the training data sets used by data analytics and algorithms? We used to call it AI, by the way, it's machine learning. And if anybody hasn't read it yet, an article by an ex-Google employee, she was a Google employee when she wrote the article, ex-Google employee after it was published, which tells you about it. It's called Scholastic Parrots. Actually lifted the lid on the bias of the training data sets used for recruitment and for decision making. And I've been in this field I've worked with AI for years, and I've done things like doctor clinical support systems. All of that experience is the data training sets matter more than the algorithms. To the problem we got with data analytics, and particularly the use of machine learning, is people say AI, they're not starting off by saying, what's the function of this thing? How do we validate box doesn't work very well for humans? But critically, how do we train the systems? The classic example on this, if you look through successful managers in Google and you use that as a training data set, then all the CVs selected for future models, because that's the previous pattern of bias, and that's built into the system. So I think the DevOps community needs to do, and the AI community needs, the whole technology needs to do, a little bit less obsessed with the statistics and the algorithms, and pay a little bit more of things. One, training data sets, how we train these systems, and the other is how we actually manage that interface. And I'll make a general point of frustration I have with conference systems, and unfortunately this one isn't doing it. Virtual collaboration, they try and replicate a physical space. Next, because you can never get the stimulation you get from a physical space in a virtual space. Little scientific fact. One of the ways we determine whether we trust somebody or not involves traces. So you don't get the stimulation in a virtual environment, you need another environment. So the work we did in the computer interface group in IBM, which I was associated with in Watson, what we worked out fairly fast is if you wanted a virtual environment, it shouldn't look like, it should be completely different so that the visual clue showed you interactions in different ways. Working on this quite extensively in terms of decision support and strategy. And we talked about entanglement. So effectively, we can create multiple strands or interactions and then we can start to entangle them in different ways through high-level visualization, see patterns in multiple interactions. And then that gets really interesting. Data analytics and people as all having agency, and we can look at patterns and differences. And again, I sort of practice here. We've just completed a big project for the European Union where we manage fake data. And this is a big problem on the internet. The sheer flag operations and everything else is actually quite scary. Now, we were one of 6 projects. Somebody else was trying to write an algorithm to beat the other algorithms. We took a different to do is to get humans to interact with this data in a different way. At the moment, then there are algorithms which create targeted lies for indices, which they feed to them through social media hours before they vote. So we're at a level which is really very scary. And destroying algorithms with analytics is kind of like isn't going to work. So we're looking at different types of empathy. So working with George Mason, we're increasing social interaction between people from different, but mediated by technology to bring them together across the boundaries they didn't realize they had in common. So they start to see they've got more in common than they thought. Technology to augment human interaction. Yeah. So that's one. The other thing we've just finished building, and is interested is get in touch. We're now looking at what are called meaning walls, a whole new approach to data analytics and understanding, in which when you come into a virtual or physical wall of narratives, both pictures, oral, visual, stimulation, news page. When you find one which interests you, you don't just like it. I mean, you actually select it and then tell a story about it, what it means for you, and you interpret. Then you're shown how other people from different groups and different backgrounds interpreted the same data. It actually has a quite profound effect because the other people went through the same process as you, data in different ways. So it starts to show you different perspectives, on how things improves everything from sort of peace and reconciliation work in political conflict between users and technical people. Because if I take a meaning wall, for example, of eulogy, and you look at that and then you interpret it, that's statistical pattern of interpretation against the user's pattern of interpretation. You look at the differences, and that increases your empathy, your understanding, your synergy with the user, so you can actually better understand what's going on within the system. Now, mixing sort of some of the theory behind this with some of the practice, and I'm trying to give you some of the area which is kind of like moving out of bleeding edge into leading edge. And we're doing works, for example, hospital decision support. So we just completed a project for the Dutch government, where we've had continuous narrative capture from residents, medicals of residents. And that's quant data. So people tell stories as they take pictures, but then they self-interpret into a quant framework. And that was implement the transaction systems, things like cache monitors and everything else. But actually, it's now twisted. It's now the actually feeding a narrative, because a narrative has more value. Because we can look at the difference between residents, relatives, and medical staff, and we can start to see why things. And we can say to the medical staff, you need to create more resident stories like these and fewer resident. And we can also use the relative stories to actually create weak signals, effectively early weak signals of abuse of residents in. Now, again, same sort of principle. We're not just relying on data analytics, proving the capacity to take volume human interpretation and use that statistic with a more traditional machine intelligence. So we have this mixed type data analytics that originally with the US Army in Afghanistan, where we actually with company commanders using the Gemba system to capture pictures of a combination in the field, self-interpreted at that point in time. And then we could, if you do this, you don't have to write a patrol report, which meant we got 100% compliance. Human metadata across multiple human agents in the field. And we traditional military sensor data. So I got human metadata and the complementary aspects of the two mean I actually get better anticipatory weak signal detection, for example, for improvised explosive devices, and I've reduced them on my company commanders. But they can also find more stories like theirs, so they can horrors in the field. And again, that's a hybrid system between computers in terms of the way things work. Okay, so I've tried to get science on this. I've tried to argue really strongly that we need to see humans as different but compatible. And I've argued for engagement, diverse backgrounds. And part of the problem IT has got in particular, and this is, it doesn't matter what you're talking about, is people who are really good programmers are actually decent from the rest of the population. So we've got to find ways to increase the diversity with. And critically, and this is a message I want to leave you with before I stop, and we need to increase the humanity of the way we design systems. We need to switch, and I'll leave you to think about this. Currently, we design system assumption that we design a system to make you operate more efficiently. Design systems which are more ecological in nature than engineering. And in flower gardens for genetic variety as well as formal gardens. We create this highly complex ecosystem, which is simple to use, between technology and people objects and physical objects and buildings. We need to create this, which provides for healthy growth of people and ideas, rather than effectively stuttering actors with an engineering concept. Stop, and I've got no idea whether that worked or not because I've got no feedback from the audience, and I hate these. So I will now stop. Any questions, any comments, or have I run out of time anyway? So.
Well, I'm back and live once again with Dave Snowden. First of all, Dave, thank you so much for your very, very intriguing sessions. We have actually received a couple of comments from the audience, which I'm just going to put forward to you. But before that, I really want to thank you for joining us at the DevOps India Summit. We are truly, truly grateful to you for giving us your time and for your esteemed presence in the conference. Thank you once again, Dave. All right, so yes, please.
I just said it's a real pleasure. I'm just sorry I can't be with you physically. I haven't been to India for about 5 years.
Oh, okay. We would love to have you in India very soon, maybe next year.
Yeah,
in the live session.
I'm planning to do the 3 passes of birth. So I'm working up to that at the moment.
All right, no worries. Whenever you're free,
Yeah.
please do let us know, and we definitely would love to have you here in person. And I'm sure the whole DevOps community would love to see you in person and get a lot of your thoughts on such an intriguing topic that you've just spoken to us about. Okay, so we are having some questions to you, which I'm just going to put forward. So one of our users has asked this question with respect to your Canadian framework, and his question is. Many agile practitioners seem to be very confused between complicated and complex domains. What is the actual difference between these two domains according to your thoughts?
Okay, so first of all, they used to be synonyms. One sense making thing, which I and others do, is you take a synonym and make it an antonym. You look at, for example, theory of constraints and Goldratt's theory of constraints, interchangeably. He just sees them as variations of the same word. Yeah? And so you quotes from that. But if you look at the meaning of the word, it's complicated, comes from a Latin root, which means, so if you've folded something, you can unfold it and it doesn't change. Latin root meaning entanglement. So if everything is entangled, like mangrove swamps, you break it apart, it's all interactive. So that's the origin of the two words. Yeah. Environment. One of the ways we define a complex system is if the in hypotheses, and you can't resolve which hypothesis is right on an evidence for decision, then it's complex. Right? And a lot of user requirements. But put very simply, Scrum is actually not a complex systems technique. Nevin, Scrum fits within the liminal domain in complex and becoming complicated. The capacity of Scrum is to do micro iterations to actually improve the delivery of user requirement or a rough definition. Yep. So that is complex, but it's borderline complicated. So I gave you like an articulated need management and entangled, trying to be truly complex to feed into the backlog for a technique like Scrum. And I think what I'll have is they keep trying to put things in boxes in Cynefin. But actually, Cynefin is about moving. Yeah, and you need to think about that when you're doing software development. You are trying to make, and therefore, if you think about it in terms of dynamics, it's more valuable. Yeah? In a complicated domain, there is a solution. Experts know what it is. You understand what the solution is by multiple small probes in parallel, not in sequence, reveal what's possible.
All right. Thank you, Dave, for that very insightful response. And I hope the audience member who put this question, I hope your question is answered very well. Okay, we have another question. While we were looking at the engineering aspect, how do we look at it from the point of view of customers?
Well, there's a complexity principle called disintermediation, yeah, which means you need to layers between the decision maker and the raw data. All right, so this is always opposed the idea of story points. Like Ron Jeffs as well, because what story points are is somebody else's interpretation. So the way we'll give a developer a cluster of user experiences recorded without secondary interpretation. Yeah, so that increases the intimacy developer and the users. The other thing is people have forgotten one of the 3 feeds into the Agile Manifesto was DSDM, and I was DSDM. 3 of us met in a pub in Cheltenham and set up the DSDM consortium, and so we didn't try and take proprietary advantage for it. One of the big things within DSDM was joint application design, which was workshop virtually. You had high levels of interaction between users and developers, and we created better prototyping, but generally poor execution. And sometimes we do things like round towers in the UK, pass over the results to India, who would pass over the results to the West Coast. So you had multiple people interacting with each other in requirements before. So the key thing to understand users better, and it does, by the way, this is hand development, it doesn't matter which it is you need to increase the direct engagement from users, both in proxies through their stories, but by directly through physical interaction.
All right. Thank you so much once again, Dave. And before I let you go, there's one more question which I would love you to answer. The question is, do you feel agile methods are on the right path? And if so, then why don't agile practitioners understand how they actually work?
I think because you've got the framework walls. Yeah. I mean, for a start, Scrum isn't a framework. Scrum is a collection of methods. Yeah. Safe is an aberration. It's taken, you can do it by going to the original source and putting it together better. Yes. Scrum is fighting Kanban, a proprietary method. We've now got complete nonsense like Agile 2, trying to create their own version of Agile. And this is actually very dangerous, yeah, because you've got this fragmentation. If anybody's interested, we're actually about to launch a major initiative where we're working and with a whole bunch of Agile specialists to create an open, breaking all the Agile methods down to their component parts, and then people can reassemble components from different vendors and different ideologies to actually the process. And we're not doing that in a proprietary way. That's going to be an open source approach. Take a sprint out of a Scrum process, replace it with a 3-month time block. Yeah. So I think what we need to shift towards, and we're part of a big movement, but collaborative, multi-method, multi-vendor, contextually appropriate assembly of methods, and then people adopting single frameworks.
All right. So what I get from what you just said, that you feel that the whole concept of Scrum and Scrum Masters is not really useful in an agile environment?
No, I didn't say that. I basically said people, they say you've got to do Scrum or you've got to do Kanban. Well, that's nonsense. You can do both, right? So you can't create mastery through a 2-week course and an open book exam, all right? We need to think about it else. What I'm basically saying is virtually everything I can see, which is original in Agile, because there's nothing original in that, has huge value, but everybody tries to make that rather than realizing it works in different contexts. So we need to really sort of break the parts and allow it to reassemble. Then it becomes something which is sustainable. At the moment, everything else has died because people overstructure things too early.
All right. Okay. That was very nice of you to explain all the concepts that we just asked. Thank you once again, Dave, for the very, very stimulating session. I really hope you enjoyed being at the DevOps India Summit.
I did. Yeah. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you, Dave. All right, ladies and gentlemen, with that, we are towards the end of this session. We have one more keynote session with us, which is going to happen in few hours from now, around in the evening in IST. So I hope all of you join us for that session. It's going to be extremely intriguing. We have Dr. Tapabal with us in that session. I'm sure all of you are very looking forward to him. He's been with us for the last few years in the DevOps India Summit. And today he's going to be live with us. So if you have any questions for him, please do drop in at that point of time. We are going to be live with him and we're going to answer your questions. All right, with that, ladies and gentlemen, this is the DevOps India Summit 2022. I'm your host, Riya Kumar. I'm going to see you in a few hours from now with our next keynote session. Thank you.